Hello, 605 Speaks friends. It is September in South Dakota, which means it's still really, really too hot. But the leaves are changing colors, and things that are important to keep in mind in September. From my last video with Dana the librarian, we learned that it is library card sign-up month. That's their big promotion across the nation. So if you don't have a card for your local library, please sign up for one. I told Dana I would try and encourage people to get that done. I know it's something I need to get done. I don't have one in the county I live in now. So library card month. But also September is Kids Cancer Awareness Month. So you see I've changed the t-shirt to my Fight Derek Fight t-shirt because one of my personal heroes is Derek Gerlach and his cancer fight, which although he is in remission, it is a continuous fight for him. And he just had more scans and screening done and everything looks great. But if you go to hashtag Fight Derek Fight online, you can find his GoFundMe. They are always still working on paying the bills and making thrills, I guess is how to put it, because now he's a high schooler and it's time to plan for his future. And I'm so glad that he made it through everything he has to have a beautiful, bright future. So Kids Cancer Awareness Month, be aware. And now today we're going back West River. We're going to talk with somebody who lives in Rapid City, and it is very appropriate that this is still a Library Month related discussion topic because we're going to be talking to an author from Rapid City, and I've been looking at her website and looking at her books, and I think we're also going to talk about her other side of her professional life coin because it's interesting to me. So I am excited to bring onto the screen. I'm going to bring on two things. We're going to bring up her website, and maybe there it is. There's her website. And Evelyn and I are going to be off to the side over here. Evelyn, welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to meet you and to be able to share with you.
Yes. So Evelyn Leite, I did ask if I was saying your last name correctly. I'm glad that I was. And we've got your website up. And I have to say, I'm sort of derailing my usual process of asking people questions about their lives because there's kind of an automatic intro to asking you about yours. Your first book that grabs my eye, I'm going to kind of bring up that screen so I can click on it here, is the title that says Just Fine, Thank You. And It says Born in South Dakota. Is this a fictional account of your life, or is that a true account of your life?
That is a true account of my life and what it was like to grow up in the 40s on a farm with no electricity, no running water, with a large family of one girl and 5 boys, a mother and a father, and all the things we went through at that time.
And was that all in the Rapid City area?
No, it was actually in a place called Seneca, South Dakota, which is in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere. Is it one of those towns that isn't a town anymore?
I believe it still has a post office, but it does, and a senior center.
As long as it's got a post office, it's still a town to me. That's what we need. So now I'm going to have to go on a quest to find Seneca, South Dakota.
It's near Faulkton.
Okay.
On Highway 212.
All right. So lifelong South Dakotan.
Yes.
Tell us about how do you get from a town that's so tiny, even you aren't sure if it's still got a post office, to our second largest city, Rapid City?
Well, I've had a lot of detours along the way. We moved to Fort Pierre when they started to build the Oahe Dam.
Oh, okay.
And those years are what I'm talking about in Dance Like There's No Tomorrow. So that was a really, really wild town in South Dakota during that time. And I witnessed so many things during the building of the dam. And that's what that book is about.
I even think of that as a very cowboy town now, today.
Oh, it is. It is. It was really rough and wild then. In my book, I talk about my friend and I sitting in a car watching people fall out of the bar and watching one man get his throat cut.
Oh, no.
I think I was 15, but it was just wild. The town was crazy. It was 24-hour nonstop wild.
And that's also to me, like, I guess I've always, Pierre is in one time zone and right across the road, Fort Pierre is in the other. And I've always felt like when you cross that imaginary line, it just, you feel the change. Now we're in a different place. And it's always interesting to me when there are places like that are so close together, but yet so unique
by a river.
Yeah, so unique by their independent differences.
Yes.
And what drew you to writing? Have you always been a writer, or is that something that later in life you wanted to document these stories?
When I was a junior in high school, I had an English teacher who had us doing literary writing. And she said to me, well, Evelyn, there's one thing about it. You'll never be a writer.
Oh.
That was when I was a junior. So I didn't even try for years. But I did write a lot of poetry and a lot of short stories and things in my spare time. Nobody ever saw them.
And you just kept it all to yourself? Did you any of those writings from in the past, have you worked them into your books now?
No.
No.
I'm always thinking I will someday, but actually the books I've written now are pretty inclusive. They talk about everything that happened. A lot of bad things happened, a lot of good things happened, and I tried to include them all.
And you never left South Dakota, so there must have been enough good to keep you here.
I did. I left South Dakota, got married when I was 17 to a guy in the Air Force. We lived all over the world.
Oh, wow.
We lived in Japan. One of my children was born in Japan. We lived in California, Colorado, lots of places, Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. So I did, yes, I left South Dakota.
Do you feel like it's a good place to have returned home to, though? Do you feel like South Dakota now, Rapid City now, what about it makes it feel like the place to be in this part of your life?
I always felt that South Dakota was my home. And when I was doing a lot of public speaking and I was living in other states, I would say, like, for example, when I was living in Oklahoma, I would say, I'm from Norman, Oklahoma, but really I'm from South Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was like, I just have to go home.
Right. I think a lot of people that I've talked to, even ones that have said, someday I want to move on, or I want to see other places or live other places, that sense of home is very, very strong for South Dakotans.
It certainly is for me. I lived a lot of places, but I always wanted to come home. And I did back in 1989, I moved to Sioux Falls. And the reason I moved to Sioux Falls was I was sending out resumes everywhere trying to get a job. And I had a job offer in Rapid and a job offer in Sioux Falls. And the job offer in Sioux Falls paid $28,000 and the job offer in Rapid paid $13,000. So it was a no-brainer.
Yeah. And that in 1980, that was, I'd have to look up what the exchanges, but that's a little bit different money than 28 and 13,000 would be now.
Yes.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about your, like I said, the other side of the coin for your professional life? Because as I was looking at your website, it talks about your counseling career. Tell me a little bit about that.
I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. I mean, as families go, we were really, really close, but my father was an alcoholic. And there was a lot of confusion in my house because what was true one day wasn't always true the next day. And I married my first husband very young. He turned out to be an abusive alcoholic. So when I left him, I was determined to go to college and work with children because I knew that if anyone would have helped him when he was young, he wouldn't have been abusive. And if anybody would have helped me when I was young, I wouldn't have married him.
Right.
So South Dakota at that time had a dearth of counselors. Now there's one on every corner, but back then there weren't that many. And you didn't even need a license to be one. So I went to college at Black Hills State for almost 5 years, graduated with a double major. One was in politics.
Oh, well, that's handy.
One was in counseling.
I feel like you probably could have got a gig counseling politicians. I'm sure that there's a need for that. That's got to be a high stress industry.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Well, then I went to work for the state of South Dakota, held several different positions for the state of South Dakota, but ultimately I ended up in the Division of Alcoholism. And that's where I wrote the very first book I ever wrote, because a lot of people were asking me questions about alcoholism. And there were so many questions that it would take me all day to answer them. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to write a book and then I can hand them the book and they'll have all the answers.
There you go.
So that's what I did. And Hazelton, I don't know if you've ever heard of Hazelton.
Yes.
But Hazelton Treatment Center accepted my book and published it in 1979.
So you've been playing the role of author and being published in more than one format. As far as, would you consider your writing from that time as being almost like technical educational, not reading for pleasure necessarily?
No, the first book I wrote was called To Be Somebody. It's actually on the screen right now. It was the story of my life with an abusive alcoholic. And I wrote it because people did not, back then in the 70s, women were property. We were just beginning to find our voice, but we were still property. And nobody paid any attention. If a woman was being battered or abused, there was nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
There was no help available. And I went to ministers, I went to counselors. None of them had any answers for me. Ministers said, go home and pray. Some counselors said, well, if you'd be the right kind of wife, he'd be the right kind of husband.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was very clear to me that people in the professional realm did not understand alcoholism, and that I thought maybe I can make them understand. And so that's what the book is, my personal story of being a battered wife.
And what do you think and so you were living in South Dakota when you wrote that?
Yes. I was working for the Division of Alcoholism.
What do you think the reception from you, people that knew you, what was the reception to? I mean, not only were women still property at that time and there weren't resources, but women weren't speaking out about their own personal stories. I mean, we're all telling our story now. We're all Facebooking and tweeting and TikToking our stories left and right, but women weren't speaking outside the home, and some not inside the home in the 70s still. What was the reception from the people that knew you?
Well, the book was in print for 12 years. I had a lot of support, a lot of fan mail, a lot of people who really called and said, that's my story. You've been looking in my window. I did have a few people who were really dismayed and thought that it wasn't very Christian to share that kind of music or that kind of message. But for the most part, it was really positive.
The idea that it wouldn't be Christian for you to share your message, and I would think that that would be the most Christian of things, for you to reach out to other women in need and say, you're not alone and I'm here. And I mean, if you've been told to go home and just pray for something, maybe they were praying for you and they didn't know it. They were praying for you to write your book.
Maybe. I know that there were a lot of women looking for the kind of help that I was looking for, and it wasn't available.
How do you see in your area now? Do you see, as because you're still actively acting as a counselor in your area now?
I do some.
So
Mostly I just write.
So you've stayed in touch with it and written about these topics over the years and living where you've lived. What do you see in Rapid City are there more opportunities for women to find resources, or is it still just as hard?
No, across the state of South Dakota now, there are battered women's shelters. There aren't enough, but people understand now the dynamics, and they have put in shelters, and they do fundraisers, and they get help for these women that was never available before. I remember I was working for the South Dakota Health Department when these women formed a battered women's shelter in Brookings. And that was back in the late 70s, probably about 77. And they came to the health department to talk to all the heads of all the departments. And my boss sent me in his place. And so I am sitting in this room, and there are men in this room saying, "We don't have battered women in South Dakota. We don't need a shelter. There's no battered women in South Dakota."
That makes you wonder how many of their wives
were being battered.
Yes, would have given a different answer if they had been allowed to.
Well, and then shortly after that, I testified in front of the legislature because they were trying to pass a law against battering women. And there was no law against that. And so I testified for a whole day in front of the South Dakota legislature, and they all looked at me with total disbelief. And they all said, "It's all in your head. It's all your imagination. This would not happen if you were the right kind of person. This would never happen." Well, that brings an incredible amount of shame.
Mm-hmm.
The shame that they were putting on me because I was being abused and I was talking about it, and they were in total denial that it ever happens. So that's where we started in South Dakota with battered women's shelters, and we have come a long way. Rapid City has really good services for battered women.
What do you think is something that Rapid City has in general that you feel like women who are raising a family or working moms or stay-at-home moms, what's something about the Rapid City area that you think is really a positive for women?
Well, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else right now. I believe that women are accepted as first-class citizens in Rapid City just about everywhere they go. I mean, we still have people who are in denial and feel like there is a big difference between men and women. And there is a big difference. I'm not saying there isn't, but it's not a difference of equality or of worth.
Right. I think right now, statewide, there is still the struggle for women of color and for Native women, I feel like is still almost as bad as it was for every woman in the 70s. I feel like that Rapid City is on the cusp of providing more and better services for all of the native families in that area, and it's been much more public and visible. But I think it is probably still just as hard for women of color and native women to be able to speak out. If you were to sit down with a woman who said, yeah, I still feel like it's 1976, what do I do? What would you encourage them to do to get their stories out?
Well, I've been working on the reservation for the last 20 years. I've worked on every reservation in South Dakota, the Crow Nation in Montana, and the Meskwaki Nation in Iowa. And it's the same story everywhere you go. The story of trying to make it, trying to get an education, trying to be a person of quality. I do a lot of codependency workshops, a lot of addiction and grief workshops. And I would encourage these women to go to codependency meetings, to go to a counselor who understands family dynamics, because that is the key. Not every counselor understands family dynamics.
Right. And codependency, well, and I also think there's a misunderstanding of how many things are in their own way a contagious illness. Alcoholism. You yourself might not be an alcoholic, but the living with someone with alcoholism, you can acquire elements of the disease, and you suffer under elements of the disease. And depression and things like that are there's genetics at play, there's nature at play, there's nurture at play. And I think you're right. I think codependency is something that a lot of people don't see in themselves.
They don't understand what it means, for one thing. And it is pretty difficult to comprehend unless you actually get counseling or go to codependency treatment. It's hard to comprehend.
It is. What is something that you think, having been all across South Dakota, then, what are some of the things here that are, what are some examples of things that are successes for people? And I tend to lean towards women, because I'm a woman, and so I look for things that are positive for women. But what are some positive things across our state that are successes for women or families, or escaping that codependent life cycle?
Well, there's way more opportunities for women now than there used to be, and that is one of the positives. Another positive is that people, for the most part, any educated person is not in denial about what happens to women and children in an alcoholic home.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because there has been so much education on the dynamics of it.
And how do you see, there's been so much talk in South Dakota lately about education and different kinds of education and what we need to be educated on. Are there things that you know of in the school systems and things like that help? Like you said, if somebody had reached out to you as a young person and told you there are options and opportunities, you might have had a different direction in life. Or your abuser, if they had not gone through something in their childhood. What are some things that we might see across South Dakota that is helpful to the kids that are going through that?
Every child needs someone in their corner. Not all kids have that. One of the things that I see happening that I feel like is a tragedy is a kid acts out. He gets in trouble in school. Nobody checks to see what is causing this behavior. They just shame and condemn this child. And I believe that all of the mass shooters, all of the people who have hurt other people have been horribly abused at some point in their life, and they begged for help in their own way, and no one gave it to them.
No one looked for the thorn in the lion's paw.
That's correct.
They just let it keep going and festering.
Right.
I think that we have so many, and this project has helped me too. There are so many small things all across our state, small, fun, happy things that because we don't think they're as big or as entertaining as going somewhere else or doing something else, I think they're getting overlooked. I think that there are so many more ways that we could all be venting some of our frustration just by going outside in our own home state. I know when I come and visit your side of the state, I love the Badlands, and I love just walking around and just absorbing all of that. And over here on my side of the state, I grew up playing in the falls of the Big Sioux River, which is not necessarily the healthiest river to play in.
Not anymore, for sure.
Yeah. But like that, just getting outside and going outside. And I think there's so many more things in South Dakota that they don't get the publicity of, say, the Mount Rushmore or whatever. Is there any place you've ever been in South Dakota that you would consider like a hidden gem that more of us should do the long drive and go see?
South Dakota is full of hidden gems. There is one south of Sioux Falls. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but there's a steamboat south of Sioux Falls where you drive 9 miles out in the country on a gravel road. And there is this museum full of things that were taken from a sunken steamboat back in the 1800s. And they're all behind glass. And it's just even the admiral's suit, ketchup bottles, silverware, dishes, jewelry. I mean, you can spend a whole day walking through this place and nobody even knows much about it. You drive south at Sioux Falls quite a ways and you'll see a little sign on the left-hand side of the road that says steamboat.
I'm Googling this right now because I have never heard of this.
I know. There's lots of places in South Dakota that nobody's ever heard of.
Is that well, there's the Sergeant Floyd River Museum in Sioux City. Is it that?
Nope. It's before you get to Sioux City.
Gosh, I'm going to have to do a lot of research. Okay, that's on my list of things to research tonight because I'd never heard of that.
There's also a wonderful old monastery in Redfield that used to be a boarding school that it's pretty locked up, but we managed to get in. And we
hypothetically
found old school papers, and I mean, just everything from back in the early 1900s is in this school,
and it's just still there. I think I did one of these 605 Speaks with an author that lives up by Redfield, and I think that she mentioned that as being one of the sort of unknown spots in her area. Yes. And yeah, it is. There are little, when you look at the cartoon maps of South Dakota, and there's like always a dot at Sioux Falls and it's Statue of David, and then there's Corn Palace, and then now you see the Lady Dignity from Chamberlain a lot, and the Capitol, and then Mount Rushmore, and that's it. The rest of the state is blank, and there's so much more.
So much more.
So much more. What is your favorite hidden gem right near to you, considering you live in kind of tourist land central? What is something that you really enjoy going to do, or going to eat, or going to just find some alone time that the tourists would never know about in your area, in Rapid City area?
I don't think I know of anything that the tourists don't know about. We have been flooded. I mean, we have an influx, not just of tourists, but of people moving here.
Yeah.
At a high rate, a high number per day of people moving here. And you drive downtown and the traffic is doubled what it used to be.
Right.
I see Texas, Colorado, Minnesota, California license plates. And I go to meetings or I go public places and people will say, "Oh, I just moved here 4 months ago. I just moved here 2 months ago. I just moved here 6 months ago." And it's like every other person you talk to.
Yeah, it's becoming that way in Sioux Falls. You can win road trip bingo just on a trip to the grocery store now.
Yes, yes.
The license plate bingo, it's
Mhm.
getting easier and easier.
Yep.
What do you see in the future for your writing? Do you see writing more South Dakota stories?
Yes, I'm finishing another book right now. I'm getting it wound up. I reached a point where I had to have somebody critique it, and now she's done that. And now I'll go back and redo the things that she suggested and the comments that she's made. My books are meant to help people understand mental health and alcoholism and the issues with trauma
Mm-hmm.
and loneliness and the things that people fight by themselves, the demons people fight on their own, where they don't need to, where they need people. If people only understood what everyone was going through that they pass on the street, they would be way more compassionate. And actually, September is Suicide Prevention Month. And so I'm really involved in that, trying to prevent. My book, the whole sole purpose of my books is to let people know they're not alone.
Right.
You're not alone out there. This happens to a lot of people.
And it can get very lonely in rural South Dakota.
Oh, absolutely.
In small towns where everybody knows everybody, and even if you go into town and wanted to go see a counselor or see a doctor, they probably know that husband, or they probably know your significant other, and they know where you work and they know what you do, and it's hard.
And that's the title, Just Fine, Thank You. That
Yeah.
was my mother's stock answer. And in fact, that was all of our stock answer. When someone would say to mom, "How are you?" she'd say, "Just fine, thank you." I
Yep.
mean, we had drama going on in our house, sometimes 24 hours a day, but we were always just fine, thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And it gets cold and dark at night on the prairie, and there's not always someone to call.
No, there isn't.
And what is a way to, I feel like by writing books like this, that's your way of being a beacon. How would you advise to others if you're willing to be a beacon and be that? I sometimes say to people, don't just post a hotline, be the hotline. Make
Uh-huh.
sure your friends know that you are someone they can call. What are
Uh-huh.
some ways that we can be beacons in our community?
Smile, tell people you care about them, ask them not just how are you, but what can I do to support you?
Ah, mm-hmm.
What do you need?
Yeah, change the sentence structure.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a big difference in saying call me if you need anything and saying what do you need, or I mean it can be just a difference of one
Or
word.
coming up with something that you can provide.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of times when someone dies, people will say to the bereaved spouse, "Okay, let me know if I can help." Well, I'm not going to let you know if you can help.
Right.
What it would be important to do would be to show up with something.
Right. Yeah.
And it's true of a lot of things where somebody is going through something very serious, to just show up, to
Right.
just bring something, to just say, "I'm here."
And I do think that used to be the tradition of everybody showing up with a casserole.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the Midwest way to show our willingness to be a part of something as we shove food at it. Here's some carbohydrates. let's make it better with casserole.
Well, I had cancer, breast cancer, and the people that I thought would be there for me were nowhere to be seen. The people that I didn't even consider showed up. They brought meals. They brought themselves. They brought videos. They showed up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing. And so, I mean, you think when you have really, really good friends, that's going to be on your doorstep. That is not always true.
Right. Because sometimes the people that are comfortable talking to you every day, they're only seeing the surface, and that's why it's comfortable. It's somebody that isn't seeing the surface that sometimes they can barge right in.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thought. When you were going through cancer and going through something like that, what is the most, even if it was just a small thing, what's the most unique thing that someone showed up with and you're like, in this moment right now, I didn't even know I needed this, but thank you?
We had a next door neighbor that we barely knew. She came over with a 6-course meal 3 nights a week. She didn't just come once and dump it off. She came 3 times, and she and her husband sat in the living room and visited and talked. And I didn't feel much like talking, but I didn't have to.
Mm-hmm.
They just were there. They just came, and we barely knew these people.
So they gave you a break from that overwhelming feeling of what you were going through.
Yes.
I think that's a big thing in a place like South Dakota, where almost everyone is working 1 or 2 jobs and trying to run a home. And there are so few resources for comfort. Mm-hmm. I think we have that prairie mentality of, like you said, you grew up without running water. So now we should consider having running water a comfort, or electricity a comfort.
Right. It certainly was when we finally got it.
When you finally got it. Yeah. And it's like, I think we have such a stalwart idea of what is comfort, when really you can get pretty creative and bring more comforts to those long stretches of gravel road.
Mm-hmm. You can.
What is, in your experience, I have tons of questions about speaking in front of the legislature in the 1970s. Was there any elected official that was a woman in that room that day?
I don't recall any. I recall staring out into a sea of men's faces.
Men's faces. And I still feel like it's like that sometimes.
Yes, it is.
I think that we're seeing a turn in that, but a lot of our women that are elected, I feel like they have to pantomime that they are just the same as the men, mm-hmm. to get ahead. And really, like, what makes it worth it is that they're different. Like, we need that difference.
Like, we need that opinion.
Yes. And experience, and different experience.
Right.
Who do you think right now in South Dakota, and I don't mean necessarily a specific person, but maybe in a specific role, where do you think our positive leadership lies? Is it in our teachers? Is it in our faith leaders? Is it in our elected persons? Is it in the mom down the street? Where do you think our leadership in South Dakota really lies right now?
We have lots of active women in Rapid City, and they do things. They don't just talk. They show up at school board meetings. They show up at city council meetings. They show up at county commissioner meetings. They show up, and then they share what they have found. Unfortunately, we have a kind of a biased newspaper, so we have to read that with a grain of salt. But we do have lots of active women in Rapid City.
And they're not showing up to say just fine, thank you.
No, they're showing up to say this needs to change.
And I think that that's very soul lifting to hear that there are sometimes I'm think that I'm too loud and that there's nothing I can do about it at this age. I've committed to being too loud.
You're wonderful.
And whether or not being too loud is good or bad, and it is good to hear that there's some other loud ladies out there.
You're really wonderful.
Maybe on some dark nights when we can hear each other across the state howling and in solidarity.
Yes.
I always talk like 101 Dalmatians. I say sometimes we need to put out the all bark alarm.
Yep.
Make some noise. What would you say if somebody asked you, what about South Dakota makes it worth returning to or worth staying for? You know, we hear so much about brain drain and our young people leaving. What do you think South Dakota offers to all of us?
I really believe you have to leave to appreciate it. I left for several years and I appreciated it so much more when I came back because I actually grew up on the river. Our house was right on the river. I didn't even appreciate that there was a river in my backyard until I left home and I realized not everybody has a river in their backyard.
And that's a beautiful, that's one of the most beautiful parts of the many rivers of our state is right there in that Pier area.
Right there, and it's beautiful. And we got a lot of lakes in this area that are really beautiful, and the hills. The hills can't be beat. They're so beautiful and spiritual. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
you are. I do agree with that. Now, I've never left and never wanted to, but I do think I hear that more and more from people is until they went away, they didn't know what we had.
I know that my son grew up in Sioux Falls and he could not wait to leave. First thing he did was get a job in California. And he was gone for about 3 years and he could not get back fast enough. He was working for an electric company, so he traveled all over. He didn't just live in California. He lived in Vegas. He lived in a lot of places where they were building substations for electricity. But when he was fed up, he couldn't wait to get back to South Dakota. And he actually came back to South Dakota and went to Black Hills State College.
There's always somewhere to put your head down in South Dakota and find solitude.
And there are people here who are good people. They support you. And they don't even know you, but they're there for you sometimes.
Do you go and do book signings and book adventures? Is that on your agenda with your new book that you're working on?
Before COVID hit, I was doing that a lot. And I belonged to the Exceptional Women Speakers, and I had speeches lined up across the country. And then COVID just put a kibosh on everything.
Yes.
So, yes, I would like to get back into doing public speaking and sharing my story and sharing my books.
And that's what we talked about before we started recording was the whole start of this project for me was not being able to go do some of the things that I had done before. And I got lonely for talking to strangers.
Yes.
And
we had excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, no, just, and that's it. I mean, I got lonely for talking to strangers,
We had an international codependency conference here in Rapid City. There were people here from all over the world, just less than 2 weeks ago. And I presented the workshop at this conference. And there were a lot of people were virtual, but they were from Israel, Pakistan, Canada, a lot of other countries were. And then all of the states, it was New York and Pennsylvania and New Jersey and California and New Hampshire. And I got to meet so many wonderful people at this conference. And that is one reason I love conferences.
Right. It's that you get to meet people and talk and learn a little something and move on. Like it's no commitment to.
No, it's just meeting them and talking to them and sharing with them.
I can't imagine people from all over the world converging on Rapid City.
That happened. We couldn't imagine it either, but 3 years of planning by a committee. I wasn't on that committee, but those women worked really hard to make that happen.
Where did they host it? What was the venue?
It was hosted at the Ramkota, and they came from all over the country.
I feel like when I go out there, I hit that little bit of construction. And I get scared. And then I make my way through it and go to the big candy store and I feel better.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't believe that used to be a museum to the presidents and I never went once. And now it's a candy store and I go every time I'm in Rapid. That says something about me, I'm sure, but
it says something about Rapid too.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what little town. I love how when I'm over there, like Rapid City and everything, Sturgis, Spearfish, Lead, Deadwood, Keystone, all of that. My friends over there, they'll be like, well, let's go eat in Deadwood. And I'm like, that's like an hour drive. And you're like, yep, get in the car.
Yep.
Here, like, I don't drive like an hour to go eat in Brookings or whatever, unless I plan a day for it. And over there, you guys are just like, yep, get in, look at the mountains. It's pretty.
Yep.
What's your favorite other little area town to go window shop in? When you're
like
a tourist,
Hill City
mm-hmm.
and Keystone.
Yep.
And you can take a back road from Keystone to Hill City and you can see just amazing scenery. Or you can take the main road and see Mount Rushmore.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like those. I like going to those places. I like going everywhere in the Black Hills. Have you ever heard of the Rochford Mall?
I feel like I've driven past it, but not that I have a concept of what it is. I know I've driven through Rochford.
Rochford has 100-year-old cabin, and it's called the Rochford Mall. And you walk in this old cabin, and you see crafts and canned goods and things that are being sold by the local people. And it's called the Rochford Mall.
Well, that's going to have to be on my list for next time I'm out there.
Well, you should check it out because it's really interesting.
I need to learn to stop when I see these little signs. I see, like, I'm sure I've seen the little sign, but I've just been driving through and not stopped.
Yeah, you didn't realize.
I know, and I feel like I'm a tourist in my own state when I do that, and I should try and be better.
Well, we have a lot of ghost towns too, and we have what's called moonwalks. And you can sign up for a moonwalk and go walk under the full moon in a ghost town. What? It's awesome.
Why have none of my friends told me about these things? My people that live out there, they're all in so much trouble.
They probably just take them for granted.
It could be. It could be. This is something else I have to Google now.
Yeah. Moonwalks.
There we go. I might even have moon boots that I can break out and wear.
That'd be awesome. But you'd be better off in tennis shoes. Some of the terrain is pretty rocky.
Yeah. Have you ever encountered a rattlesnake?
Oh, yes. Many times. But one time I was at my friend's house. She doesn't live very far from me, and she lives in a place that her grandfather homesteaded over 100 years ago, so it's pretty old. And she was having a garage sale. And we were running in and out of the garage, bringing stuff out and setting it on the grass. And all of a sudden, I heard this rattle, not very far from where I was standing. And so I went out and I said to her, I think I hear a rattlesnake in there. And she said, oh, no. I said, come, listen. So she went, and it was a rattlesnake. And so before we could continue with the garage sale, we had to call a snake eradicator.
Oh my gosh.
He came with his tools and got the snake off of the wall of the garage, which was like 2 feet from where we were grabbing stuff and carrying it outside.
So I gave you warning, at least. It was like, get out of my zone, ladies.
Yeah.
I know whenever I go to Chamberlain, I have to stop and see the Lady Dignity, and there's the sign right there that says watch for snakes. And I hear tourists like, ha, ha, ha. And I'm like, I know people from Chamberlain that have been bit more than once. Don't disregard the sign.
When I lived in Fort Pierre, when I was growing up, we had a rattlesnake den under our back porch.
Oh, wow. How does one get rid of that then? Do they come back every year no matter what?
This one did. I don't know how my dad got rid of them, but it was there. And we all knew when we stepped out on the back porch that there was a rattlesnake den under this porch.
Man, we have to worry about rats. I grew up in Sioux Falls. I grew up in a neighborhood down by the meatpacking plant along the river, and it was rats that we worried about down there.
Yes. I lived on 26th Street.
Yeah.
We had rats in the house, and they came up out of the shower, and it was very disturbing because if there's anything, I can handle a snake, but I really hate rats.
I know that there's an archery place down in the neighborhood I grew up in. It's adjacent to the neighborhood, and they have a haunted trail walk every Halloween. And the first year they did it, I'm standing in line, and I thought it was so cool because my neighborhood was right over there where I grew up. And I hear the lady explaining to people, if you feel something crawling on your pant leg or grabbing at it, just kick it away. Don't put your hands down there because it could be a rat.
Oh,
and the other people in line thought it was part of the show. And I'm like, no, she's not kidding. We're right by the river.
She means that.
It could be a rat. Just kick it.
Yep.
Don't put your fingers where it could bite you, because then you're going to have to get rabies shots.
Yep.
So, well, Evelyn, I appreciate you talking with me. This has been very, well, now I've learned about steamboats and moonwalks. I got that on my Google list. But yeah, I am very interested in looking at your books and actually passing those titles on to some people I know over here and making them aware of them. And I'm probably going to give your name to my friend Thea that is part of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, because I think you should be somebody she should reach out to for a class. So we'll put that on your agenda. I'll just start signing you up for stuff, okay?
That would be awesome. I haven't had a manager yet.
What is your final thought if you wanted to do a wrap up on your life in South Dakota, either in the past or now or in the future? What's your final thought on being a woman of the Dakotas?
My final thought is that I was very lucky to be born into a family where my mother was a feminist before there were feminists. She was very codependent, but she was also very, very advanced for being born. She was born in 1904. So she was very advanced in terms of women's rights and things women can do. And that was one thought, that I was really fortunate to have a mother like that who encouraged me, go to college, be somebody, do something, get your life together. But also I have done so many things in South Dakota that no one knows anything about. Like, I was assistant director for the Future of South Dakota program in 1970s. And I traveled across the state and I set up conferences for Governor Knipe. And I met so many wonderful people. And there's a whole story behind the Future of South Dakota program. And there's just so many stories in South Dakota that people aren't aware of.
Well, it's time to get writing. Get all those written. We're at the clock. We'll get them done by Christmas, so we've got some stuffer. Well, I I think that's awesome that your mom planted those seeds for you to be the next generation of feminism for South Dakotans.
Well, my dad did too. In spite of the fact that my father was an alcoholic, he said, I want you to go to college. I want you to do things. I don't want you to ever have to depend on somebody to support you or take care of you. He was very forward thinking also.
And it has grown through you, and it has showed as a positive thing then.
Yes.
Yes. Well, Evelyn, I thank you. I'm going to sign off of our little video here. You just stay put for a second.
Share with you. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for sharing all of this with me. This is going to give me some thoughts to chew on here. So,
all right, good.
Oh, what an excellent thing. I love it whenever I do one of these and I get a list of things to look up and look into. And now I have a list of books to read and look into. And yes, September is Suicide Prevention Month. And it does get dark and lonely on the prairie and in the mountains. And don't just post a hotline. Make sure if there's someone in your life that's struggling, try and be the hotline and answer the call. But there is so many amazing reasons for all of us to stay here and be here. If you're struggling, make sure that you reach out to someone and remember that your struggle is not just yours. You're never alone. You're never alone. It might feel like it sometimes, but our state, there's wide spaces between each of us, but there are more of us here than you know. So, and if there's a chill in the air, make sure you wear a sweater. So thanks for watching, everybody. Click on Evelyn's link and buy the books. Bye.